Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Health Mastery Show. I'm your host, as usual, Adam MacDonald, and in today's episode, I have on with me Chris Barakat. I got to meet Chris multiple times this year in the US. I got to meet him in July and also at the Worlds in New York. Chris is a really, really nice guy. He's also a scientist down at the University of Tampa and a fellow competitive natural bodybuilder. In today's episode, we talk about the new book that he released alongside Jeff Nippard, which is a book all about body recomposition, the ultimate body recomposition guide. And basically what that means is gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time, or improving your overall body composition, so specifically for aesthetics. So in this episode, we go through all the different tactics that is explained in the book, and we cover off nutrition, sleep, diet, exercise, and some of the findings that Chris has found in his lab where he does research. It was a really enjoyable episode for myself to learn about, and I definitely had some key takeaways from this, so hopefully you do enjoy it. And if you do like the episode, please do leave a rating and review. But without further ado, let's get into this episode with Chris Barakat. So Chris, my man, thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
And for anybody who doesn't know who Chris Barakat is, give a quick introduction to yourself, your work, your background, and what you do.
Sure, man. I guess I'll start off by saying I primarily am involved with bodybuilding through coaching, but I kind of have my feet in a lot of different waters. So I teach at the University of Tampa. I teach nutritional supplements. I've taught general nutrition classes in the past, as well as exercise science. I graduated from here at the University of Tampa with my master's in exercise and nutritional sciences, and I primarily teach to be quite honest, so I can continue researching. So I'm pretty passionate about researching topics all related to bodybuilding here in the Human Performance Lab. So it's definitely a win-win for me. And yeah, I coach full time. I've been competing since 2011. So I was someone who didn't even know natural bodybuilding existed until 2010. So I walked into one of my undergraduate bio classes, and there was this kid who was pretty jacked, and started talking to him. Obviously, went to the gym, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm like 2 weeks out from a natural bodybuilding show." I was like, "Oh, what's that?" And he's like, "They polygraph you. You get like urine tested." I was like, "Oh, that's super cool," because I was already training like 5 days per week at the time anyway, and I loved the lifestyle. I just didn't know that there was a natural route to compete, and I needed to scratch a competitive itch. So anyway, he became like one of my best friends, lifetime friends, and I got involved in the sport at a young age at 19. Competed in 2013. I believe I was 21. I won like an open lightweight class and lost the overall. I was very young and immature, and thought I was like chasing a pro card at 21. It was absolute nonsense. And then I came back in 2017 after graduating and competed at the INBF Hercules and the Muscle Mayhem in California. So yeah, man, that's basically what I do. I coach, I teach, I research, and absolutely love this game.
That's awesome, man. And one of the classes that you teach, is it nutritional supplements? Is that just a class based off of like sports supplements?
It's not sports supplement focused. So the undergraduate one that I teach is an elective course. Fortunately, I was basically able to design the course as I wanted. So essentially, the first 2 to 3 weeks are going over actual just general nutrition to make sure the students have a good foundation there before diving into supplements. Then I talk about like industry rules and regulations. And the way I break up the course is actually by going over different body systems. So like we'll cover cardiovascular health, digestive health, cognitive function, insulin sensitivity and diabetes. And then towards the end of the semester, we do sports performance and stuff like that. So I basically break up the semester based on like health category, so to speak. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty awesome subject. I'd love to be able to take that. And it's pretty cool the way you can design your own class, or at least the structure of it.
Yeah, I was very, very fortunate and grateful for that. when I taught a general nutrition course here, and the university wanted me to use like the textbook that all the teachers used, and I absolutely hated it. I would literally like pull up stuff from the book and like use the strike through option on the PowerPoint presentation and just like completely erase it because a lot of the information was outdated and stuff. But yeah, the fact that I had the ability to kind of create my own course was definitely something I really enjoyed, and I think gives the students just a better experience overall.
Yeah, that is really cool, man. And recently you released a book with Jeff Nippard called The Ultimate Guide to Body Recomposition. And today I wanted to talk to you about pretty much that. So without going too in depth right now into the book, can you explain to us or give your definition of what body recomposition is for those who don't know?
Sure. So typically speaking, body recomp is when you are gaining lean body mass, primarily muscle mass, and losing fat mass simultaneously. That is the most standard definition of it, and that would be, definitely like true body recomposition. Another kind of caveat to body recomp, or another way I would view body recomp, is when you're lean gaining and you're gaining more lean body mass than you are fat mass, or you're not gaining any fat mass. So your body fat percent is going down, and your lean mass is going up. Even though you're not actually losing fat mass, I would still consider that recomp, absolutely. And then the last version is, it depends how you want to view it, but it's almost like having an extremely successful cut where you're retaining all of your muscle tissue while losing just pure fat mass, like doing a really, really good job cutting. But traditionally speaking, it's just gaining muscle and losing fat simultaneously.
Yeah, and the second example that you gave there is something that really kind of, I suppose, a light bulb went off my head when I first realized that a couple of years ago, or whenever it was, is that the percentage of your body fat that you have goes down if you maintain that body fat, but increase your weight, because body fat is obviously a percentage of the overall weight. So if you maintain the same amount of body fat, but your absolute weight goes up, then you're essentially recomping.
Absolutely. And you look way more aesthetic, because you're gaining muscle and not gaining fat. So you definitely look better.
Yeah. So with those scenarios that you've given, what kind of person can best achieve those? Or is this something that everybody can achieve? Because it sounds like the ultimate goal, right? Everybody, when they, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced, you're pretty much, everybody wants to get a little bit leaner and a little bit bigger, depending on like how lean you are or how big you are. But well, I don't think anybody doesn't want to get bigger, but I think that's the goal, right? Just to improve your body composition, and basically, so to speak. So get as big as possible, get as lean as possible, simultaneously not have to bulk, not have to cut. So it sounds like you've unlocked the key to success. So what kind of person can achieve this? Or is it someone that's new to training? Is it somebody that's using anabolic steroids? Is it somebody that is coming back from a layoff? Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So, I definitely do want to say that there are absolutely phases where we recommend being in surpluses and deficits. It's just how you're approaching it is going to definitely change, and I'll cover that kind of as we go along. But in regards to who this is, practical for, it almost is everybody, except those that have been, crossing their T's and dotting their I's and already doing everything that they should, and they have plenty of training experience. But I'll kind of start with the beginners and then kind of go over different scenarios over time. Those that are new to weight training definitely have the greatest potential, to build muscle, right? Because it's a novel stimulus, and they're so far away from their max genetic potential that they're going to gain muscle at the fastest rate. So one thing that I highly encourage, and something that I see people make a mistake on, is if someone is, just they have like an average percent of body fat. So let's say an average percent for male is like actually 18 to 20%, and then average body fat percentage for females, generally our age is around 30 to 32%. the first thing a lot of new trainees do is jump into a calorie deficit because they want to lose fat, right? And that might maximize their fat loss capabilities, but it's actually going to hinder their muscle building potential, and it's actually going to decrease their overall body composition. So a lot of times when a novice trainee just gets into lifting, highly recommend that they eat at maintenance or a surplus unless they're extremely obese and overweight, because they will build muscle and lose fat simultaneously if they have a good nutritional program in place, as well as a good resistance training stimulus kind of providing that drive and creating those adaptations that we're seeking.
Yeah, so I mean, when a beginner starts lifting and starts eating well, coming from, like, let's say a background of not lifting at all, and not, probably in the most cases, just the main thing is probably just not eating enough protein, they just get results almost from doing anything. So like I think regardless whether they're in a surplus or a deficit, they'll still get results. But like you mentioned, to maximize the results, they don't necessarily need to lose fat or to be in a deficit like somebody who's more advanced would have to be.
Yeah, like, I don't know, maybe you can go back to when you first started weight training, but I'll kind of use myself for an example. Even though I did a lot of things wrong at first, I was gaining body weight, right? Just not nearly as fast as I should have. And I would say that my body fat percent definitely stayed the same, if not went down a little bit. So I was gaining total body mass, I was gaining muscle mass, and I definitely was not gaining body fat, right? So, I mean, for me, I was like 135 pounds soaking wet. I was a basketball player in high school. And when I went from like 135 to 150 in a relatively short period of time, my body fat percent definitely didn't go up, even though I gained 15 pounds. It was relatively just like pure lean body mass, right? I don't know if you kind of had a similar experience.
Yeah, I actually played basketball a lot when I was younger as well, and I started lifting that way. I wasn't necessarily tracking my body weight because I started lifting like 16 years old or something like that, 15 maybe, and my goal wasn't to it was to get bigger, but I wasn't like meticulously tracking my weight. I didn't know that much, so but my body fat definitely didn't go up, and I definitely, when I look at pictures, I think that's the period where I made the absolute biggest jump in progress. I've made significant progress since then, but in the time period, time ratio to progress ratio, I made the biggest in that. And I was only training, like I was playing basketball like probably 8 times a week, like some days multiple times, and training with weights like a frequency of once per week, only training 3 days a week, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I made significant progress. But like I said, anything kind of works. Like with the newbie, like I probably could have made a little bit better progress, but I just had the same program, push, pull, legs, or something like that, some variation, 3 sets for 3 exercises for all muscle groups, and then just try to get stronger, and no like periodization or anything like that. My only periodization was just add more weight to the bar.
Yeah.
And it worked.
Absolutely.
That's the thing. So I wish it was still the case now, but I think I got to be a bit more meticulous and a bit more programmatic with the way I plan out my training. But what are some of the other examples of people who can body recomposition? I know for a fact that with people who use exogenous hormones, you see guys who like quote unquote grow into a show, so basically losing body fat and building muscle like significantly, where they can actually be the same weight or even slightly heavier but look way different on stage.
Yeah. So obviously enhanced lifters, their ability to recomp is going to be enhanced as well. Muscle protein synthesis is elevated, and that's pretty common on the other side of the sport, especially for like the more novice amateur level enhanced competitors. In the elite stage, I don't actually think that's happening. I think they're just retaining basically as much muscle mass as possible while they're cutting, because I think one problem that they make on that side of the sport, just generally speaking, not everybody, but they lose a lot of body fat in a relatively short period of time. So I think that hinders their ability to truly recomp. And I from what I've seen from some case studies and from what I've seen in person, it looks like they just do a really good job of retaining and maintaining their lean mass, but not actually building tissue simultaneously. So yeah, that's kind of how it is on the enhanced side. But one thing I wanted to mention is, one thing that a lot of people don't think is possible is for this to happen in trained population, right? There's actually a lot of literature on well-trained subjects, and that's how it's defined in the literature, where recomp is presented. There's multiple studies from just training studies, nutritional studies, as well as some supplemental studies. Now, how you define well-trained in the literature really varies from study to study. Sometimes they only have 1 year of resistance training experience. Sometimes they have a minimum of 3 years of resistance training experience. And in one study in particular, the average training age for each subject was actually like 8.9 years. So recomp has been demonstrated in the literature across a wide variety of population, and it's something I see every single semester with the subjects that come into the lab. So every semester we usually have one large study and then maybe 1 or 2 smaller studies going on, and we might have 30 subjects in one study, and I see recomp happen with approximately 20% of our population, where they're gaining lean mass and losing fat simultaneously. And I just think people have this belief that it's literally impossible, but it's just simply not.
Yeah, so if we focus on, let's say, or we forget about the people who are coming back from a layoff, or who are extremely obese, or who are using exogenous hormones, or who are brand new beginners, because I'm not going to say that nobody that's in those categories is going to be listening to it, but I think the majority of people who listen to this will probably have at least 1 year of trained or training experience, so, and maybe more. So we could just say that if we focus on those who are trained, how would you go about this? I'll exclude myself from this, because I probably feel that maybe I've been training maybe 10 years, and maybe I still could benefit from this, and I think to an extent you probably can, but maybe the less advanced you are, the probably more you can benefit from body recomposition. Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So go ahead.
Yeah, so what I would like to share is kind of what I've seen in the lab here with the particular studies we've ran. One thing I think that makes a huge difference in this setting is the training intensity that we're actually pushing these subjects to. A lot of people don't train or have never trained to like true muscle failure, like true concentric failure, and that's something that they'll be forced to do in the lab, depending on how we set up the study. And I think that next level of training intensity is definitely one driving force for really driving this adaptation response, as well as improving their nutritional adherence compared to what they previously were doing. So, I just see a lot of, if you take the average gym goer, I'm not talking about the average competitor per se, but if you take the average gym goer, you see them do a set of like 8 or 12, but that they had like 4 or 5 reps in the tank, but they stopped the set because their program said, okay, do 3 sets of 10. So they just stopped at rep number 10, but they're not using appropriate load and working at the appropriate intensity.
Yeah, I mean, I was in the gym doing legs yesterday, and my program called for a leg hack squat, just 3 sets with a one rep short of failure, so not even to failure. And before that, I'd done 3 sets of squats. So in total for quads, only 6 sets. And by the last set of my hack squats, and I took it to, it wasn't to failure, but like genuinely could only get one more if like somebody like put a gun to my head.
Yeah.
And I felt sick, like puking for like 30 minutes afterwards. Couldn't eat.
Yeah.
Had to lie down on the bed afterwards when I got home. And today my legs are destroyed, like literally really, really sore. And that was only 6 sets total. and I see people on the hack squat like they're doing like 15 sets. Like
Yeah,
when I'm
yeah.
waiting, I'm like, if you even got like 5 reps short of failure, you wouldn't be able to do more than 5 sets.
Yeah.
So I think that's important, and I think I train in a commercial gym, so it's kind of hard to. I see frequently that people, the intensity just low overall, and people, not that failure is necessarily always the case, or you need to go to failure, and you probably agree with me, you don't need to go to failure in all your sets to get the maximal response, but people, they don't know what true failure is, so they think, I'm stopping 2 reps short of failure, but like you said, they're probably like stopping like 6 reps short of true failure. And in the lab, I guess it's easier when there's somebody telling you there. You have to go almost like a personal trainer, but you want to kind of show that you can work hard. So how would you give advice to somebody that trains in, say, a gym where the atmosphere isn't like a East Coast Mecca or Gold's Gym in Venice? How would you give them advice to push yourself, but still in that environment that's not necessarily going to bring you up? Because for me, even I find it sometimes difficult to even push myself in an environment like that to true failure. Because when you're doing something like a hack squat for like 12 reps and one rep short of failure, it's not easy work.
No, not at all. Yeah, it's brutal. I think having a good training partner can be extremely beneficial. Obviously, someone who actually has serious goals. They're not just in the gym to kill time or be like, not just to improve their health, but because they actually really are trying to improve their physique to some magnitude. But I think it's something that you actually kind of need to learn over time, and your intensity is something that you can't. It's almost like a skill, right? Like, you're not going to expect someone on day one to perform an exercise first and foremost with great execution and really good form, and then learn how to push that exercise to like true failure, because your mind is always going to tell you that it's done before you're actually physically incapable of doing it, right? So unfortunately, I don't know if I have like any advice, but just getting really focused and kind of telling yourself that you're not going to let your mind determine when the set is over, and you're literally going to pay attention to when you're physically incapable of completing the movement. That might be a good tip, but I think a lot of people are losing focus and intensity throughout their training sessions. I think cell phones are a huge freaking distraction in the gym. I think when you're in the gym, if you can build your focus and your intensity from set to set, you're going to have a much better session, rather than doing a set and then kind of getting distracted and like going on social media and then like doing another set and then getting distracted for another 3 minutes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I actually personally like to I have this YouTube Premium, so you can like watch videos when you close your phone. And I watch like these, I think it was like really old videos that I watched when I was like 18, 19, like I think it's called Zashni or something motivation. It's like bodybuilding motivation. And it's so like cringy to think about it. Like, I used to watch that, but it actually does help. It's like really motivational music with like, I don't know, Flex Wheeler or somebody speaking over it, pushing Sean Ray in the gym, and it actually does help. When I listen to it just before my set. Like, I don't walk around the gym listening to that, but just before my set, and it's like that's my virtual gym partner.
Yeah, no, that's cool, man. I used to be obsessed with all the old school like Train with Kai videos and the Kai Green videos of him training. Whether he's like doing the voiceover or whatever, but that stuff used to get me like super hyped.
Yeah, I remember watching the video where he was like in his small apartment in New York, and he had all the fire burners on in the cooker.
Yeah,
and just so he would sweat balls. It's like, what the heck? That guy's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Like, it's just no bed. Like, I don't know what he thought would happen there. He'd sweat out fat or something.
Yeah,
it's just nuts. He's just burning a hole in his in his wallet with the gas bill or whatever.
Yeah,
but it's pretty funny. But I don't want to get too off topic. To come back to the body recomposition. What so if we had you said that you saw some of the results in your lab, but what specific results did you see, and then how would you begin to say set this up for somebody who's a trained lifter, like nutrition wise, training wise, supplement wise?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, there's been so many studies over the years. The first study I was ever a part of back in 2016, we saw recomp in probably 6 out of 19 individuals. Um, and yeah, like the largest gains I saw in that study, somebody gained like 9 pounds of muscle while losing 4 pounds of fat in only a 10-week training period. So, I mean, that's pretty darn impressive. Um, Another study that's currently being published, it was a volume study looking at 12 sets per week, 18 sets per week, and 24 sets per week of leg training. One study gained 20 pounds of lean body mass while losing 2 pounds of fat in a 10-week period. And I mean, it was absolutely absurd. Now, was he highly trained? Absolutely. I wouldn't say he was highly trained. He was a college basketball player, so he fit the criteria where he's been lifting for 3 years. He was able to meet the strength criteria where you have to squat a certain amount of your body weight. I believe it was, I forget what our squat ratio was, to be honest, but it's obviously going to be published. But yeah, he fit all the criteria and he just absolutely blew up. So I've seen crazy things, but even when you look at the group means of this study coming out, all three groups, so everyone in the 12 set group, 18 set, and 24 set group, there was body recomposition happening in all of those subjects. And this was the highest resistance trained or the strongest group of resistance trained individuals that I've ever seen in the scientific literature for a randomized control trial. So I'm really excited for this study to be published literally within the next month or two.
So tell me, what is it that they did differently, or how did they get these results in terms of the training, the nutrition, the
Yeah,
life outside of the gym?
yeah. So I think a large thing is increasing training frequency. A lot of the subjects come in here and they typically do bro splits. So when they enter the study, that particular study, they had to train legs in the lab 2 times per week. And for a lot of them, that was the first time they've ever trained legs, A, that frequently, and B, with that intensity. And then believe it or not, we had no control in regards to what they did for their upper body training. It was just a lower body training study. But we were still able to track their total body composition changes, utilizing the DEXA. And then a lot of them are also increasing their protein intake simultaneously. In another study we did, it was training 3 times per week, and it was 3 full body sessions. And that was literally every subject's first time ever training each muscle group 3 times per week. But interestingly, that was also the least amount of total training they've ever done because they were used to lifting like 5 days per week, and they had to reduce their total training from 5 days per week to 3 times per week. So it's quite interesting to see like what can potentially happen when you increase training frequency and you start, getting that growth stimulus multiple times per week instead of once per week. I think that can definitely be one of the variables at play in regards to why we're seeing recomp in our subjects here.
Yeah, I would definitely like to see more work on that total volume versus frequency. I can't remember who it was. Was it from Brad Schoenfield or James Krieger? But something on the topic of volume, and it seemed to be that when looking at volume versus frequency, it seemed that overall volume was actually the driver of hypertrophy. But
Yeah.
it seems like the results that you had in your lab were that wasn't necessarily the case. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like that wasn't the purpose of our study, and we weren't monitoring these subjects beforehand, but just knowing them and knowing the splits that they were on, I think one of the reasons why they're seeing such positive benefits in an 8 to 10 week period might be because of the frequency, and then again the underlying thing being the training intensity being really high in the lab setting.
So was there any specific way that you set up frequency? Was it 2 to 3 times per week, or based off of what you learned in the lab? Was there any way that you would set up training now with volume, frequency, and intensity to optimize, I suppose, muscle growth? Because right, your training isn't going to make you lose fat, but
Yeah.
what way to optimize your hypertrophy?
Yeah, it totally depends on your training experience level, to be quite honest. and obviously how much time you have to commit to the gym. For like a complete beginner, I would probably recommend either 3 full body sessions per week, or even doing like twice per week frequency, where you're doing a full body session, an upper session, and a lower session. And then as you get more advanced, obviously if you start adding training, more training days to your weekly meso, your frequency might stay the same, but you're going to be increasing volume per muscle group, right? So if you did like an upper lower push pull legs, you're still only hitting each muscle group twice per week, but you're hitting it with way more volume, because those days just have more time essentially for you to hit each muscle group.
Yeah, so you recommend that at least twice a week. Would you have any upper limit that you think would be too much?
Yeah, generally speaking, it's twice per week. Some muscle groups I touch 3 times per week, depending on the athletes. It might be like something like lateral delts for like a lot of bodybuilders, even figure and men's physique competitors. It's super important. So sometimes they're touching lateral delts 3 times per week. It also tends to have just a faster recovery response. And then if somebody has like a really strong body part, they might only hit it once per week. And then if they have a weak body part, we might increase training frequency to 3 times per week if they're able to recover from session to session.
Yeah, it's almost identical to what I'm doing right now. I have like weak delts. I mean, they're not very capped or wide if someone's trying to visualize it. So I'm hitting those multiple times a week, and they recover. They can pretty much recover the next day if I do like keep the sets minimal enough. But anything like my front delt, my interior delts, like that can be sore for days. And then some of the stronger points like my chest or my back, I'm not hitting as frequently, just doing that once and almost just trying to maintain volume so that I can improve on these other areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with regards to the nutrition then, what did you find in your lab, and then what can you extrapolate that? I know you have a full book on this, and I will leave that in the show notes and stuff so people can check that out if they want. It's like 130 pages or something like that, explaining exactly what we're talking about here in more detail. But and I guess that book is being based off of your information that you've gathered from your experience over the years, your studies, and then also these specific studies that you've done. So some of that information has been extrapolated from these research studies, right?
Yeah, for sure, man. Most of it comes from coaching experience, right? We're using the research literature to give us some general guidelines on what not to do and then what to consider trying. And yeah, a lot of this comes honestly from coaching experience, what I've seen from my clients. So in regards to the nutrition, obviously protein is going to be probably the most important macronutrient to discuss. And there's kind of I don't want to say a debate, but there's a pretty wide range in regards to how some people approach how much protein they're eating on a daily basis. And we can definitely kind of talk about that in regards to what has been shown in the literature, and then what I've seen with coaching and how I approach it. I'm kind of curious to ask you, what do you currently do in regards to your protein intake, and maybe what have you done in the past?
Yeah, so in the past, I guess when I started, like in the way past, when I first started and I got my information from Muscular Development magazine, I would always have like at least 1.5 grams per pound of body weight, because that's what Dennis Wolf did, and he was like 300 pounds. But then I guess when I started to kind of get more into the scientific side of things and the research, I would always kind of aim for like 1 pound per gram of body weight. But now, after speaking with Juma Iraqi, who recently did a paper with Eric Helms, Peter Fishin, and Sergio Espinar on off-season recommendations for bodybuilders, he said that he had good experience with getting quite high protein post-contest with his clients, purely for the satiety factor. And I haven't actually really been tracking, but I know for sure that I've been eating a lot more than 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein in the last month or so, and I want to keep that actually quite higher. So I'm going to probably when I do start tracking again in January, I'm going to be aiming for about 1.4 to 1.5 grams, and I don't know if that's going to have any significant impact. And I know there's a little bit of research on higher protein intakes, but I know for sure that there's no negative impacts from it. Like, yeah, protein's going to cost maybe a little bit more if I'm getting it mostly from like meat and stuff, but what I know is that when I'm getting like fatter per se, or putting on weight, my diet, my hunger isn't as high, so I can get in more shakes, which previously I wouldn't have been doing shakes because just purely for hunger, I want to eat actual food. So now my protein is actually pretty high, and I plan to keep it there, like more than 1 gram per pound, maybe one, like I said, 1.4 to 1.5 for the next, I don't know, the next year or so, or just as long as I can, to see if I can get any additional benefits from a higher protein diet.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I think the 1 gram per pound rule is pretty bad advice, because there's a lot of flaws to it. If you're pretty overweight or obese, it's just completely excessive, and then B, if you're relatively lean, I think it's hindering your ability to build muscle and maximize the recovery process. So like, let's just say like you're 165 pounds at 10 to 12% body fat. I think you would be way better off eating closer to 200 grams of protein rather than 165 grams of protein, especially if you're training hard. And then on the other end, like if you're 250 pounds at 30% body fat or whatever, there's no reason for you to eat that much protein, right? So if you look at the literature, it's quite interesting. Are you familiar with the protein overfeeding studies by Antonio?
No, I'm not actually. I haven't read those.
Okay, so there was one in 2014 where they fed their subjects 4.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So what does that come out to? Literally,
It's two grams. Yeah, it's 2 grams per pound.
yeah, so 2 grams per pound. And what they ended up finding with that study, the 2014 study, was the protein overfeeding group gained more lean body mass, and they actually lost fat mass at the same time, even though they were eating 800 more calories per day than the normal protein group. So it's pretty crazy that they're eating that much more from a caloric standpoint, but because it's all coming from protein, they didn't gain any fat. They actually lost some fat mass, and then they gained more lean mass. So, I mean, that was very, very intriguing to me. And then they did a follow-up study in 2015 where they gave their subjects 3.4 grams per kilogram. And they also found that the group eating the high protein, they actually gained 1.5 kilos of lean mass, which was the same as the normal protein group. So it didn't increase their muscle building effect, but they lost 1.6 kilograms of fat mass instead of just 0.3 kilograms of fat mass. So they lost significantly more fat, even though they were eating approximately 490 calories more on a daily basis. It was all coming from protein. So, those studies were really intriguing. And what I've seen with my clients, like there's some times where I have like 175, 180 pound bodybuilder eating up to 270 grams of protein in their off season, just because I don't want to increase their fats and carbs any further. I don't see the purpose of it. They might be already at 550 carbs a day and like 110 grams of fat. It's like, if I just continue increasing their calories from those macronutrients, I know the likelihood of it being stored as fat is way greater compared to me just continuously driving their protein higher and higher. So I've had a lot of success with lean bulking people in their improvement season by really driving protein high, especially once they already have a sufficient amount of carbs and fat coming in. Like I definitely think that there's a limit. to how many carbs
Yeah,
you
I think
need.
that just protein is protein conversion to energy is just such an inefficient mechanism through the gluconeogenesis um, that I think that's why we start to see some of those different results in terms of loss in body fat. Because if you had the same amount of calories, like 800 calories from carbohydrates, it's a lot easier to store that or convert triglycerides or fat from those. So that's pretty interesting. So from that, what would your recommendations be for somebody? Is 2 grams what you recommend, or is it slightly lower than that?
Yeah, so in our ebook, we recommend 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per pound of lean body mass. So that's even higher, right? It totally depends on your body fat percent and how much lean mass you have. We got a little bit of heat from that, from just like random internet trolls or people on YouTube or whatever, because Eric Helms's recommendation in one of his recent papers, it might have even been with that gentleman that you recently interviewed and you just mentioned, in regards to like
Jim Araki.
protein in the off season. My understanding is Helms recommended 1.0 to 1.4 grams of protein per pound of lean body mass. So we're literally just like 0.2 grams higher in both directions. And we got some heat from it. So what I ended up doing was I looked at the Antonio study in 2014 and 2015 that I just mentioned. And, I told you that they did 4.4 grams per kilogram and they did 3.4 grams per kilogram of total body weight. And I looked up their study demographics and the body composition of each group. And what I saw was that, after like converting their body fat percent and taking their lean mass and doing all the calculations, the study that was consuming 3.4 grams per kilogram, it ended up being 1.9 grams of protein per pound of lean body mass. So that's still way higher than our recommendation. And then Antonio's protein overfeeding study that did 4.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. When I did the math, it came out to approximately 2.39 grams per pound of lean body mass, which is insane, right? So on average, they were eating 257 grams of protein in the first study and up to 323 grams of protein in the second study. So it was that 2014 study was a true protein overfeeding study. And then the 2015 Antonio study was just a very high protein study because, I have a lot of clients on that around that 250 grams per day range. That's not excessive to me, but the value I got of 323 grams of protein per day is extremely high. So that's the most I've ever seen in the literature. But again, it only produced, positive findings in regards to body comp.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And is there any particular reason that you use lean body mass rather than total body mass? Because I think most of the research is actually based off of total body mass rather than actual lean body mass. Probably because it's hard to actually track or get an accurate reading of body fat.
Yeah, absolutely. So most of the literature is just like gram per pound, like total body mass. I like using lean body mass because it's way more practical, right? Like whether you're a male or a female or whether you're, again, 20% body fat or 10% body fat, I think it's way more important to actually prescribe the recommendation based on lean body mass. So that's why we utilize it.
Yeah, I get you. And then with regards to carbohydrates and fats, are there any particular ratios or amounts that you use? And I guess that will make up the overall calories, which you can touch on as well, whether it's a slight deficit or slight surplus. But for those, is it kind of free will just to make up the calories, or do you have specific recommendations?
Yeah, if you're really trying to optimize everything, I do take a couple of different approaches. So just generally speaking, if you are on the higher end of body fat percentages, I typically recommend a higher fat, lower carb approach. And then the leaner you are and the less body fat you have, I typically recommend a lower fat, higher carb approach, just because you're going to be able to utilize those carbohydrates more efficiently the leaner and leaner you are. And the guidelines that we utilize is, fats are never going below 20% of your total calorie intake, and they're also never going above 35% of your total calorie intake. So we kind of talk about that in detail in the book. It's kind of hard to just like paint. We use so many different examples in the book. So like we'll say like, okay, you're a novice trainee and you're lean, or you're a intermediate trainee and you have X amount of body fat, or you're an advanced trainee and you have X amount of body fat, and you're male and female. So, I mean, context is so important. I hate just throwing out these like black and white guidelines. So I try to really cover so many different scenarios, and I feel like Jeff and I really tried to make sure that it kind of encompassed everything,
Yeah. And in general, would you recommend a slight surplus, or is there a slight deficit, or does it really depend on what the person, the level of their body composition currently?
Yeah, it totally depends. It totally depends. We can, if you want to like use a specific context.
Yeah. So let's say somebody who's like lifting for a couple of years, and they feel like maybe they've got a little bit of excess fat. They're maybe 20% body fat or something, and they want to get a bit leaner, but they also want to get bigger, and let's say they have up to 5 days to train.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if they're a male and they've been doing this for a few years and they're at 20% body fat, I would basically guarantee a calorie deficit. Now, the magnitude of how large that calorie deficit, it doesn't have to be too extensive. I would never really go more than that 500 calories below maintenance, like nothing too aggressive. But yeah, if you're at 20% for a male, you're basically going to be guaranteed. I would recommend going into a calorie deficit. But again, keeping protein high, making sure that your training stimulus is where it needs to be. You're training at least close to failure if you're not touching failure every once in a while. And obviously you're progressing in the gym. So that would be one scenario. Now, on the other hand, let's say you're like 10 to 12% body fat. I would probably recommend going in a calorie surplus. Again, driving protein intake to minimize fat gain, if not potentially lose fat while you're actually gaining weight. And then obviously those training stimuli still need to be in the picture to actually drive the adaptations.
Oh yeah, awesome. So do you think that there's a percentage of body fat where maybe you're too low, where this isn't going to happen? So I feel like perhaps post-contest, just due to some of the research that I've read by Rousseau et al., based off how much your hormones are suppressed and just the amount of muscle that you've lost, do you think that in post-contest, like it's very unlikely that you're going to be like body recomping, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that shouldn't be the goal anyway, right? Like if you got in contest shape and like you had striated glutes, the first thing you want to do is probably regain body fat so you can sit on the toilet and not have pain, right? But yeah, if you got super lean, the goal is going to be regaining some body fat, getting to a healthy level where your hormones are actually in a good spot. But then from there, once you kind of get to, there's a few things you can do. You can potentially want to maintain your body weight at a lower set point, right? That's an option for some, because a lot of people might not really like where their normal set point or previous set point was. I think post contest, if you do a good job reversing, you can potentially like decrease the body fat percent at where you're hormonally happy and where that set point is for you. And then once you get there, it's going to be about maximizing muscle growth, not losing fat and building muscle, but again, doing a really good job of lean bulking where you're primarily adding muscle tissue and you're minimizing fat gain. But your goal should be to get hormonally healthy, get to a normal body weight, a healthier body weight, and regain some fat.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
And with regards to supplementation, do you think that there's anything specific that you've done, or it seems like the main thing right now is the training intensity and the and driving protein intake up? Is there any specific supplements that you recommend for optimizing body composition?
Yeah. That's a great question. I actually wanted to make a post on this. Again, it's not nearly as important, but when protein intake's going high, obviously protein supplementation, like a high quality whey protein, is going to be the best bang for your buck anyway. When you look at like gram per dollar, right? Like for you to get a 40-gram serving of protein, like whey protein is always the most cost effective way.
Yep.
And then obviously general creatine recommendations are always great for performance, size, and strength. And then one thing I just posted the other day was I started utilizing a GDA, glucose disposal agent, with my pre-workout meal, and I'm going to continue using it as I'm massing. This is literally like, I don't think that this is going to move the needle, so I don't want people like dropping crazy amount of money on a GDA and think it's going to be a miracle pill. But if you are someone who is currently massing, total calories are high, total carb intake is high, and you're starting to get some kind of negative feedback after eating these large meals or these large carbohydrate boluses where you're getting sleepy after the meal, or maybe you're in the gym and you're no longer getting pumps like you used to, and you're just starting to realize you may not be as insulin sensitive, potentially utilizing a good glucose disposal agent with some key ingredients in there like berberine hydrochloride is probably one of the strongest natural GDAs that you can utilize. So I think that's one tool that can be used, and it's actually a supplement that I don't see being necessary at all during contest prep, but I see a lot of coaches or competitors like utilizing it while they're cutting and while they're already extremely lean and already very insulin sensitive. I don't see the point of it, but I see it being more beneficial while you're massing and body fat percent's a bit higher.
Awesome. And with regards to, I know in the book that you recommend specific food choices, and you actually touch on glycemic index and insulin a little bit, which often people who think about science will think that, oh, they're not important at all. So why do you focus on those things, and is there specific foods? And I know you talk about with specific foods with higher in leucine as well. So if you could touch on some of the reasons that you choose certain foods as well, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So like some of the recommendations that we make in the book, we'll take like pre-workout meals, for example. Generally speaking, I recommend utilizing a lower glycemic carbohydrate, as well as pairing your primary carbohydrate source with a fruit. So we like utilizing multiple transportable carbs. So let's just say you had a sweet potato, right? Like a low glycemic carb, like a sweet potato. That complex starch is going to primarily break down into glucose, right? That polysaccharide is going to get broken down. But if you combined a fruit with it, let's just say you have an apple on the side or whatever it may be, raisins, whatever it may be, you're now providing your body with some fructose. And these different carbohydrates actually use different protein transporters to transport those carbs. And it makes the digestive process a bit more efficient. It's probably going to reduce the likelihood of you feeling bloated. And by using the low glycemic carb, the most important thing is that you're not going to have a large spike in blood glucose and a large spike in insulin. And therefore, you're not also going to have a crash in blood glucose. And it's going to decrease the likelihood of you going hypoglycemic while you're training. So you basically have more stable blood glucose and more stable energy levels throughout your training session. So is this going to directly impact body composition by itself? No, right? Like 40 grams of carbs from a sweet potato and 40 grams of carbs from a white potato are exactly the same. But in the gym, if you have better energy and you're able to sustain that energy for a longer period of time, it might actually improve your gym performance. So now if you're, training with higher volumes, training with higher intensities, that can actually drive further adaptation. So this is where you start like looking at all the fine details and how it can really add up over time. Like when you really look at the big picture, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think one of the examples
he gave in the book, or Jeff gave in the book, was that he was eating, I say, higher glycemic carbohydrates, where the absolute amount of carbohydrates was, the same, or it wasn't significant in that sense, but because he had such a high glycemic index and little amount of fiber and fats, that his energy would almost crash halfway through, even though he wasn't in a deficit.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And there's ways you can, potentially combat it. Obviously, my first recommendation would be having a better pre-workout meal, but then you can also utilize stuff like intra-workout carbohydrates, right? Like if you know that you're dipping mid workout and you feel like you're crashing and your blood glucose levels are going low and you're not able to perform well, you can obviously get some Gatorade in you, or some sort of quick acting carb source to kind of pick you up. But you would also want to prevent that, right? Like you don't want that happening. So if you really are crossing your T's and dotting your I's, these are some of the strategies to really optimize things a bit further.
So with regards to the specific food types, you probably think that it's more important than just hitting your overall macronutrients and focusing on quality of food, and then also perhaps sustained energy, at least around the workout, as well as the micronutrient dense rich foods. But what about things like meal timing? Do you think that protein timing is important, whether that's peri-workout nutrition or just spacing it out throughout the day?
I do, man. I'm a bit bro in some ways, but I genuinely think that there is a difference between, let's just say you're consuming 200 grams of protein per day. I think there's a big difference if you're doing that in 3 very, very large meals versus 5 to 6 slightly smaller feedings, but still significant feedings that you're still maximizing the muscle protein synthetic response of each meal. I do think it would likely be a bit better to get 5 to 6 feedings of protein per day instead of 3. So I'm not really a huge fan of intermittent fasting for reasons like that. There was one study that we mentioned in the ebook where they actually compared the same macros, the same calories, and they did 3 meals per day versus 6 meals per day. And the group eating 6 meals per day at the same exact macros retained more lean body mass while cutting, and they lost more fat mass while cutting. So the total weight loss was very similar, but the group that was doing it with less meal frequency actually lost more lean mass and lost less fat mass. So it's like the absolute last thing that we would want while we're cutting, right? So I think there are clues out there in the literature that point in this direction, kind of supporting what the bros and the bodybuilders have been doing for a long time. And a couple months back, I went to the University of South Florida, which is right up the road here from the University of Tampa, where Dr. Bill Campbell's at, and he had Dr. Andy Gallopin there. And one thing that he said that stuck with me is, bro science is only bro science until we prove it right. And he feels like all of these things that a lot of people kind of crack on actually end up getting proven right, and not necessarily end up proven wrong. So I think if there's actually really good logic behind it, it doesn't have to get completely thrown out the window. Even things like the post-workout window, a lot of people make fun of that. Oh, you don't need to slam your whey protein shake immediately post-workout. But at the same time, it's probably better that you get your protein feeding in, within a 30 to 60 minute window, rather than waiting 3 or 5 hours post-workout, right? Like, is it something that you need to stress about? No, but is it something that might actually optimize what you're doing? I would say probably yes, right? So there's a lot of small things like that I think add up over the long haul.
Yeah, I think even with all the pre and post workout papers and research, although there's it's not significantly different and the variance crosses 0, meaning they're not significant, they do all lean, or most of them lean towards better advantage with a post workout meal within a significant or within a short period of time. Yeah. So I think that, like you said, it's not gonna change change the the results significantly.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to get that extra couple of percentage points, and it's not something that's going to cause you a massive amount of stress, it's probably not a bad idea. To do that. Well, outside of training, nutrition, and supplements, is there anything that you recommend? I know in the book you touched on things like sleep and how that's a bit of an unsung hero. Can you talk a bit about optimizing that and why that's important to maximize your body recomposition goals?
Yeah, the research on sleep is pretty interesting, and I wasn't super familiar with it until I started working on this project with Jeff. Jeff brought a lot of this stuff to my attention. I was unaware of a lot of the sleep research. But yeah, it's pretty crazy just to see what a couple of hours of sleep reduction can do in regards to hindering your ability to maximize fat loss and basically puts you in a really bad situation to retain lean body mass while you're cutting. So a lot of the sleep studies show that those that are getting poor quality sleep as well as poor quantity sleep, they end up losing a lot more lean mass while cutting, and they end up losing less fat mass compared to their counterparts that have improved sleep quality and quantity. So personally, I'm someone who actually struggles with sleep myself. I can make some suggestions and general recommendations, but it's something that I actually need to work on personally. I think having a night routine is really important. Trying to sleep at the same time every day, like having the same sleep and wake time and getting into a routine is really important for that. So not only are you aiming to get like 8 hours per night, but getting the same 8 hours, so from like 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. every day, instead of, maybe one day midnight to 8 and then one day 10 to 6 and kind of going all over the place. I think stuff like that's important. And I think a lot of people already kind of touch on these strategies, like wearing the blue light blockers or minimizing blue light, avoiding technology before bed, and all of those kinds of things. I don't know if you have any specific questions, but, feel free.
Yeah, I think just, maximizing your sleep hygiene, like you said, making sure that your circadian rhythm is on point by trying to get up and go to bed at the same time. But I think the thing is with sleep is that it's not sexy. It's not something that you can actively go and do or buy or take to try and get these extra results. Like, people love to hear, well, I'll take this extra supplement or do this extra amount of sets per workout or this extra intensity, something they can actively do, rather than saying like, I'll just go to bed earlier and sleep more. I mean, it's not really exciting. So, but it's probably going to have the biggest bang for its buck. Like, I even know myself that I don't necessarily get as much sleep as I should, because I often wake up at like 5:15 in the morning so I can train in the morning, or else, and I'll go to bed kind of late, or whether I'm doing like some client work or I'm making sure that I get a paper in for college or whatever, or even sometimes just watching, like, I think I'm watching Making a Murder. It's probably old, but I only started it. I don't never watch series, but the reason I don't is because when I do, I watch like every episode in like the space of 3 days. So yeah, so even I know myself that I should be getting at least 8 probably good hours of sleep. Yeah. But it's difficult to do because it's not that exciting. But
for sure.
It's always about. Go
ahead.
ahead.
One thing I totally forgot to mention. Probably because I have such a negative perception of it, is I really tried cranking down and getting data on my sleep. So I invested in that Oura ring. Are you familiar with that?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, so it tracks HRV, it tracks like sleep quality, how much REM you're getting, how much deep sleep, how much light sleep you're getting. And I used it for about at least 2 months, not every single night, but I tried using it as much as possible for 2 months, and I have completely stopped using it because it actually increased my stress and my perception around sleep. It was basically providing me with the objective data that I was getting shit sleep, which I already knew because I wasn't feeling well, and I knew I was waking up in the middle of the night, or I knew I wasn't getting deep sleep, but I realized like I was basically getting like anywhere from like 45 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes of REM a night. And I would never hit anything close to the 2 hour mark. And I was just so frustrated that like I'm getting minimal REM and I'm just getting really poor sleep quality. And it just became like actually like an additional stressor. It kind of becomes one of those things where like if you're really good at intuitive eating and like you've been tracking for years, you know, you don't necessarily have to track your macros to the gram anymore because you already kind of put that work in and like you already have that skill set, where sometimes like collecting that data is just like an additional stressor. This freaking Aura ring was stressing me out, dude. Like I stopped using it. I'm like, screw this. You know, maybe I'll use it like once or twice a month now just to see if I'm like improving at all, but it's something that actually like pissed me off and stressed me out more. So I figured I should share that. I know a lot of people use the Whoop or a lot of these different like sleep trackers. If it's giving you like more stress going into bed and you're kind of like nervous about the results or whatever it may be, you're probably better off just doing without it.
Yeah, that's an interesting finding, and it's kind of like when someone's trying really hard to get to sleep and then they can't sleep because they're trying so hard that all they're doing is thinking about getting to sleep.
Yeah.
It's like you kind of just have to like not try, and then it'll eventually happen.
Yeah.
And I bought a Fitbit. I had been using it for like my steps for my whole prep, and then mine broke, and I just like 2 weeks before I competed in November, and then I got a new one which is like a much better sleep tracker, and I haven't quite figured out how to kind of use it. Like I know how to actually use the product, but how to use the data, because like I know what I should be doing and I try to maximize that all the time. So it's not like, all right, I slept 6 hours, so you know, what am I going to do today? I'm not going to do anything differently than I did yesterday. Or if I stayed up till 1 a.m. I got up at 5, you know.
Yeah.
I don't need it. I don't need my Fitbit to tell me that I'm tired that day. So I guess like maybe if you're trying like different supplements or something like that, or you're trying to like play around with your perhaps your meal timing or size of meals or macronutrients before bed, maybe to see if that affects your sleep, or if you're trying like a new wind down routine or something like that, perhaps you can then maybe try and quantify or objectify the results of that. But I think, like you said, tracking your sleep probably isn't that useful. I do see a lot of people doing it and sharing the results, but to what end? I mean, what does that even mean? It's just, well, okay, you slept well. That's good. But you didn't need to, you know, your Fitbit to tell you that. But Chris, thank you so much for coming on. But before I let you go, what would be the biggest takeaways then in terms of body recomposition? Let's say the people aren't, let's say a trained lifter probably isn't already doing. What do you think the biggest things that they could implement? Some of the things that I learned from you today was perhaps increasing your protein intake is probably one of the biggest things. But what are some of the other things that you would recommend that people could maybe take away from this podcast?
Sure. So I would, honestly say self-audit what you're currently doing. Take a step back. Take a look at your training program. Make sure that your training program is actually designed around your goals, and you're utilizing exercises and a frequency and a split that makes sense for your goals and your needs, not necessarily that mirrors what a lot of other people in the industry are doing. I think that's one thing that happens with the social media age, is like everyone just kind of copies like their favorite, whatever you want to call it, like influencer, bodybuilder, whatever. So make sure what you're doing actually aligns with your goals. I just hopped on another podcast on Monday, and we spoke about like people performing exercises that aren't giving them a good bang for their buck and don't have a good stimulus to fatigue ratio just because other people are doing it. So like, audit your training program, make sure that it actually makes sense for your goals and your physique needs. And then also, look in the mirror and truly question, are you training hard enough? Can you train harder? Are you doing everything you can from a nutritional perspective to maximize your performance in the gym and maximize your recovery? So that's what a lot of the book dives deep into. Is it's not necessarily that, okay, by having a better pre-workout meal, you're now going to magically burn fat and build muscle. But it's about, okay, by optimizing your pre-workout nutrition, you're going to have a better training session, and week by week, day by day, that's going to add up, right? And then by having a better post-workout meal, you're going to improve your recovery so you can train harder the next session. And then besides pre and post-workout, by optimizing your entire nutritional approach, potentially increasing protein, maybe increasing meal frequency, whatever it may be, you're now able to kind of train better, recover better, and then drive these body composition changes. That would basically be some of the key takeaways.
Thanks so much for sharing, man. So where can we find more about yourself and your work? And I'll leave the book then in the show notes as well, but where can we find more about your work?
Yeah, so just recently in October, I kind of like relaunched or rebranded, came out with a new brand called School of Gains. So that's gains with a Z because it's more anabolic. Yeah, so School of Gains is where you can find a lot of like free articles, like blog articles, videos, all of the podcasts that I do kind of eventually, like they get posted on there, like the iTunes link or whatever gets posted on there, as well as like my training programs, my ebooks, and all of the research I'm doing in the lab too. Whatever has already been published, I kind of like link the articles on there, as well as kind of give you guys a heads up on what research projects I'm currently working on and like what's to come. So definitely check out schoolofgains.com. And then for coaching purposes, especially for competitors, all of that is under competitivebreed.com. And yeah, on Instagram, it's just my name, man. It's at Christopher.Barakat. And if you guys wanted to email me directly, you can do it through the site, or you can just email chris@competitivebreed.com.
Awesome, man. And when do we expect to see you back on the stage, on that bodybuilding stage?
Man, I want to make 2021 happen. I want to make it happen. I should just say I'm going to make it happen, right? But the goal is 2021. The only thing that would inhibit me from doing 2021 is if I feel like I just genuinely didn't make enough progress and I'm not going to look significantly different than my previous competition season in 2017. So if I have a really good 2020, which is what I am, set out to do right now, I want to step on stage specifically in September of 2021, because the first time I ever competed was September of 2011. So it'd be really cool to have like a little decade celebration and see what 10 years of competitive bodybuilding kind of looks like. Even though I had a terrible 2019 from a training progression perspective.
But hopefully you can use your own book to take your own information and apply it.
Yes, absolutely. I have to.
Well, thank you so much again for coming on.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it.
So guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode with myself and Chris. Hopefully you took some informative away from this episode and you can apply that to your own training and nutrition. I personally have found that I did recomp my own body about a year to 18 months ago before I started my last contest prep. I pretty much held 195 to 200 pounds in and around there for about a year to 18 months, and by the end of those 18 months, my body looked completely different. And I wasn't actively trying to recomp my body. I just didn't want to bulk because I didn't want to get too much heavier, and I didn't want to cut because my training was good, I was feeling good. And by the end of it, I did look different. Now, not significantly different. And I think if you're one of those people who we talked about, like somebody who's new to training or perhaps overweight or is perhaps coming back from a layoff from training, you're going to maximize the ability to recomp your body composition. And I think that those who really want to maximize muscle gain probably want to go through periods of bulks, with slight surpluses, and then periods of cuts, but nothing too aggressive. But I think though, if your goal is to just maybe maintain a lean physique and perhaps build muscle, but maybe at a little bit slower rate, this is definitely something that you can apply to yourself. However, like Chris mentioned, you really need to cross your T's and dot your I's. If you want to optimize your body composition and simultaneously build muscle and burn body fat, or build muscle with minimal body fat, you really want to be maximizing everything in your control, like your sleep, your training, your nutrition, even things like supplementation and meal timing and frequency. So I hope you really enjoyed this conversation. If you want to learn more about Chris and reach out to him, all of the links that we talked about with regards to Chris are in the show notes, and you can always reach out to myself through my email address, or you can get me on my Instagram, send me a DM. But without further ado, I just want to say thank you for listening once again, and please do leave a rating and review wherever you are listening to this podcast. So that's all for now, and I will see you in the next episode.